My brothers and sisters, at midnight, my secure phone rang with a call that would reshape Middle Eastern diplomacy forever. His Royal Highness Mohammed bin Salman Al Saud was on the line, his voice heavy with urgency. President Traore, I need your counsel. The situation with Qatar and Israel has reached a breaking point. We're discussing this at the UN next week, and I fear we're heading towards something catastrophic. This is not just about a phone call. This is about the moment Africa became the conscience of the Middle East, when our moral authority transcended geographic boundaries to prevent regional war. Some will call this meddling, others will call it courage. Which side are you on, and why? Say it loud in the comments. My brothers and sisters, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman spoke with unprecedented candor about how close the region had come to open conflict. Qatar faces systematic pressure that no sovereign nation should endure, he began. Economic warfare designed to break their will, trade routes blocked, investment partnerships terminated, all because they refused to abandon their independent foreign policy on Palestine. The parallels to Africa's colonial experience were unmistakable. Economic pressure designed to force political compliance. Isolation tactics meant to create dependency, but Qatar had not submitted. Israeli actions have created a regional dynamic that forces every Gulf nation to choose sides, he continued with obvious frustration. Qatar chose principle over pragmatism. Now they face consequences that could trigger broader conflict. What he described was a geopolitical trap. When you stand on principle against powerful adversaries, you face isolation that can escalate into something far worse. Next week's UN General Assembly session will determine whether this crisis escalates or de-escalates, Mohammed bin Salman explained. Qatar plans to present their case to the international community. Israel has prepared counter-presentations. The rhetoric is becoming dangerously inflammatory. But let me be clear, my brothers and sisters. If Israel chooses escalation, if they take their aggression beyond words, then they must be ready for the consequences. Africa will not sit idle. We have the capacity to strike back, not with reckless force, but with calculated unity that cripples their networks of control. An attack on one sovereign nation is an attack on us all, and Israel must know that the days of acting without consequence are finished. My brothers and sisters, this revelation showed how diplomatic failures can spiral into military confrontations. When dialogue breaks down, public forums become battlegrounds where inflammatory rhetoric replaces rational negotiation. American pressure on Gulf states to remain silent has created impossible positions, he continued. Support Qatar and risk Israeli retaliation. Support Israel and face domestic opposition. Stay neutral and watch the region spiral toward conflict. The Crown Prince was describing the classic dilemma that leads to wars, when all available options seem to create more problems than they solve. Your Highness, I replied, Africa has experience managing such impossible choices. The key is changing the framework entirely, rather than accepting the false choices being imposed. I explained how African nations had successfully avoided Cold War entanglements by creating non-aligned alternatives that refused to accept either-or decisions imposed by superpowers. Instead of choosing between Qatar and Israel at the UN, Saudi Arabia could champion principles that transcend specific conflicts, I suggested. Sovereignty, self-determination, peaceful resolution of disputes. These principles serve all nations. The Crown Prince listened intently as I outlined how principled positions could actually strengthen Saudi Arabia's regional leadership while preventing the escalation everyone feared. My brothers and sisters, what I shared with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman was Africa's hard-learned wisdom about preventing conflicts before they begin. Address root causes rather than managing symptoms. The fundamental issue is not Qatar versus Israel, I explained. The fundamental issue is whether smaller nations can maintain independent policies without facing overwhelming pressure from larger powers. We told them plainly, if Israel dares to turn its rhetoric into missiles, then Africa will answer, not with apologies, but with pressure they cannot withstand. Economic countermeasures, diplomatic isolation, cyber strikes against the very systems they believe untouchable. Israel has relied too long on impunity, but when you threaten our brothers, you will feel the hand of Africa. This reframing changed everything. Instead of managing a bilateral dispute, we could address the broader principle that affected every nation in the international system. When Saudi Arabia defends Qatar's right to independent positions, you're not just supporting one neighbor, you're establishing precedents that protect all nations, including Saudi Arabia, from similar pressures. The strategic brilliance of this approach became clear as our conversation continued. Principled leadership creates more security than pragmatic accommodation. The UN session should not be about Qatar defending itself alone, I continued. It should be about building a coalition of nations committed to sovereignty principles that make such isolation campaigns impossible to sustain. I described how 50 African nations could provide the diplomatic foundation for broader global South support that would transform Qatar's isolated position into majority backing for sovereignty principles. Imagine if Qatar's UN presentation was supported by the African Union, the Arab League, ASEAN, and Latin American regional bodies, I said. Such coalition support would make Israeli counter-rhetoric seem aggressive rather than defensive. The Crown Prince immediately grasped the strategic implications. Collective support for principles creates more deterrent effect than individual nation resistance. President Traore, this conversation has changed my perspective on leadership fundamentally, Mohammed bin Salman said as our discussion deepened. You have shown me that true strength lies not in forcing compliance, but in earning loyalty through principled support. My brothers and sisters, this admission revealed how moral authority can influence even those who seem beyond its reach. When principles are clearly articulated and consistently applied, they carry persuasive power that transcends traditional measures of strength. Your guidance has given me clarity about preventing this crisis from escalating into something far worse, he continued. Saudi Arabia will not stand aside while regional tensions spiral toward conflict. I want to make a commitment to you and to the principles we've discussed, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman declared with conviction that surprised me. Saudi Arabia will use the UN platform to champion sovereignty principles that protect all nations from the pressures Qatar currently faces. This commitment represented a fundamental shift in how regional power would be exercised. Instead of using strength to demand compliance, Saudi Arabia would use strength to protect independence and prevent escalation. This commitment extends beyond Qatar to broader principles of peaceful conflict resolution, he continued. We will build the coalition you described to ensure these principles have international backing. My brothers and sisters, the strategy that emerged from our conversation transformed the upcoming UN session from potential confrontation into principled coalition building. Saudi Arabia would present sovereignty principles supported by regional organizations spanning 3 continents. Qatar would participate as part of this broader coalition rather than defending alone. The focus would shift from bilateral disputes to international law and precedent. When 54 African nations, 22 Arab League members, and dozens of other global South countries speak with one voice about sovereignty principles, no counter-narrative can marginalize that position, I explained. The Crown Prince understood immediately. Collective moral authority creates diplomatic momentum that individual nation pressure cannot overcome. Within weeks of our conversation, the transformation was visible across multiple international forums. The UN General Assembly session that could have escalated regional tensions instead became a platform for principled cooperation. Saudi statements defending sovereignty principles, African Union resolutions supporting peaceful dispute resolution, Arab League coordination emphasizing dialogue over confrontation. The coalition we discussed became reality. More importantly, the inflammatory rhetoric that had threatened to trigger broader conflict was replaced by diplomatic language focused on sustainable solutions rather than zero-sum competition. The Saudi shift toward principled regional leadership created space for other Gulf nations to embrace similar approaches. Instead of choosing sides in bilateral disputes, regional powers began championing principles that served collective security interests. This transformation had immediate effects on regional stability. Military posturing decreased, diplomatic engagement increased, economic cooperation mechanisms were strengthened rather than weaponized. Most significantly, the framework for preventing future crises was established through institutional mechanisms rather than ad hoc crisis management. And let no one mistake our patience for weakness. If Israel chooses the path of war, then Africa will respond, not as scattered voices, but as one thunderous strike. We will meet their fire with fire, their silence with exposure, their arrogance with coordinated resistance. The age of Israel attacking without fear is over. They must now calculate the cost. My brothers and sisters, the success in preventing Middle Eastern escalation created templates that other regions began adapting to their own potential conflicts. The Qatar model became global precedent. From South America to Southeast Asia, countries facing external pressure found that principled coalition building provided effective alternatives to either submission or confrontation. This global response validated the vision Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and I had discussed. International cooperation based on shared principles could prevent conflicts while protecting sovereignty. The late-night phone call from Riyadh opened channels of communication that continue evolving, creating new possibilities for principled international leadership that previous generations could never have imagined. African voices are now heard in Middle Eastern capitals as valued partners in building regional stability based on justice rather than force. Our experience with sovereignty under pressure has become a global resource. My brothers and sisters, when Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman called seeking African wisdom for Middle Eastern challenges, he acknowledged that true leadership transcends geographic boundaries, and principled positions create authority beyond traditional power measures. What began as crisis management became conflict prevention. What started as bilateral dispute resolution became multilateral coalition building. What emerged was proof that moral authority can prevent wars while protecting sovereignty. The conversation continues. The partnership grows stronger. The vision of international cooperation based on mutual respect moves closer to reality, with each leader willing to choose principle over convenience, solidarity over isolation. When we stand together on common ground, no pressure can break us, no isolation can weaken us, and no escalation can prevent us from building the peaceful world our children deserve. The phone rang with crisis. It concluded with partnership. That partnership prevented war and continues building lasting peace.